Stars That Would Not Yield Part 1, The Silent Galaxy. Earth hung in the darkness like an ancient memory, its blue oceans and white swirls gleaming through the transparent walls of the observation deck. To Admiral Celeste Rowan, it looked smaller each time she returned. Not diminished, precisely, but as if all its old terrors had been folded into something softer. A cradle. A place that no longer needed warriors. She clasped her hands behind her back and studied the slow rotation of the world that had birthed her. Below, the teeming cities of the United Planets flickered with the quiet industry of a civilization that had finally set aside the last of its tribal feuds. There were no more nations, only districts and cultures, each represented in the planetary assembly. No more borders, no more wars over resources or old grievances. Only the quiet work of building, expanding, and learning. Once she might have believed her career obsolete. A child of the old military academies, she had been raised to imagine threats in every shadow, to rehearse simulations of conflict among human factions that no longer existed. She had felt pride the day the last standing armies merged into a single planetary defense force. But pride had given way to disquiet. When no one was left to fight, what purpose remained? That purpose had come in the form of the stars themselves. Admiral Rowan? The voice behind her was a young man's, Lieutenant Ando, her aide. His uniform was crisp, though he looked ill at ease in it, as if he still half expected someone to accuse him of playing dress-up. Yes? She didn't turn away from the viewport. The Council has finished tabulating the last transmission logs. No response, ma'am. Rowan closed her eyes for a moment. She might have guessed. This was the 100th attempt. No, the 137th, since the United Planets had begun systematically hailing the neighboring sectors. Did they acknowledge receipt? No, Admiral. Not so much as a carrier wave. She sighed. For centuries, Earth's astronomers had suspected that the galaxy was not empty. Radio bursts, neutrino emissions, gravity waves, evidence of advanced civilizations flickered and vanished like fireflies in a black field. But none had ever returned humanity's greetings. Even probes sent toward promising signals simply vanished, destroyed, or quietly intercepted. Most in the assembly had learned to call it the silence, as if naming it made it a natural phenomenon instead of a rebuke. But Rowan suspected it was something else, a choice. Whoever they were, these unseen neighbors clearly had no interest in humanity. Very well, she said. Record this attempt and prepare the next scheduled burst. Aye, ma'am. At last she turned, taking in the observation deck in full. It was a cathedral of transparent alloy, 70 meters across, affording an uninterrupted view of Earth and the dozens of orbiting platforms. Crews in white and cobalt blue drifted past the docking spindles, maneuvering cargo modules and fueling tenders with the precision of orchestras. This was the flagship Aurora Ascendant, the pride of the United Planetary Defense Forces, a vessel so powerful that no one quite knew what to do with it. Even her name felt aspirational, a promise that the dawn of human civilization had only just begun. Perhaps it had. But in her private thoughts, Rowan wondered whether they would ever get the chance to prove themselves. Lieutenant, she said, gesturing for Ando to follow, walk with me. They descended through the corridor that circled the observation deck, the deck plates humming faintly under their boots. Outside the thick windows, rows of ships gleamed, interdiction cruisers, survey corvettes, even the occasional civilian liner resplendent in bright corporate colors. Each was part of the tapestry of human progress, a reminder that prosperity did not require conquest. And yet, she could never shake the feeling that someone out there was watching back, measuring their strength, their resolve. Sir, Ando began hesitantly. Some of the younger officers, they're starting to ask whether these repeated broadcasts are worth it. Whether the resources are wasted? She finished gently. He looked down. Yes. Rowan stopped at a viewport and rested her palm against the cool alloy. Do you know why I insisted the Assembly fund these missions, Lieutenant? No, Admiral. Because the moment we stop asking if anyone is listening, we've decided we don't care if anyone answers. He fell silent, his dark eyes thoughtful. This is a time of peace, Rowan continued. But peace is not the same as stasis. Someday, perhaps sooner than we think, the galaxy will answer us. And when that happens, we must be ready. She saw in his face the same mixture of awe and uncertainty she had once carried. She did not envy him that burden, but neither would she let him abandon it. "I understand, Admiral," he said at last, and in his voice she heard conviction forming like iron cooling in a mold. "Good," she replied, "because in the end it won't matter how long the galaxy remains silent. Sooner or later it will speak, and when it does, humanity must be prepared to speak back." She turned, leaving the window behind, and walked into the bright corridors of the ship. Somewhere beyond those stars, she felt certain, someone was waiting, and the day they chose to break their silence would be the day humanity proved it had earned its peace. The Lorayans arrive. At first, no one believed the signals. The early detections came from a fringe observatory on Carthea, a planet of red deserts and shallow seas, home to the United Planets' most isolated astrophysics research station. The Carthean array was manned by only 12 staff and an aging AI called Scribe. In the middle of a routine drift correction cycle, Scribe picked up a tightly focused burst of coherent microwave pulses. Repeating, precise, a pattern of intervals that spelled out a prime sequence, first in base 10, then in base 6, then in a sequence that, once decrypted, mapped to a three-dimensional spatial coordinate. Sol system. For nearly an hour, the Carthea team assumed it was an equipment error or a prank. But when the same sequence began rebroadcasting itself across multiple frequencies, X-ray, visible spectrum, gravitational resonance, the truth became impossible to dismiss. Someone was calling Earth by name. By the time the ship itself appeared, all pretense of disbelief had evaporated. It emerged in high orbit around Mars, a dull, slate-colored spindle easily 3 kilometers long. Its surface shimmered with rows of hexagonal plates that shifted in overlapping tessellations, adjusting reflectivity like the scales of an enormous fish. The first to see it up close were miners aboard the Hilary Mendez, a helium-3 tanker making its slow arc toward Phobos station. Captain A.O. Rykov, a stoic woman who had seen every kind of orbital hazard, was rendered briefly speechless as the alien vessel coasted past her viewport, silhouetted against the ochre clouds of Mars. Within seconds, every sensor on Mars and Earth was locked onto the craft. It took less than a minute for it to begin broadcasting. The same patient sequence of primes, followed by a simple audio burst. A voice, clear, resonant, almost musical, speaking in the raw, unstructured syllables that linguists later described as a proto-language scaffold. Scribe's translation routines began working in parallel with Earth's planetary network. Gradually, a crude message emerged. "We come in peace. We are the Lorayans. We seek dialogue and friendship with the children of Sol." Admiral Rowan was aboard the Aurora Ascendant when the call came. "Bridge to Admiral Rowan," the comms officer's voice crackled, thin with urgency. "Priority broadcast from Mars orbit." She strode from her private office into the main command deck. A tactical display flickered to life, centered on the spindle ship. The tension on the bridge was palpable, crews locked at their consoles, all conversation hushed. Rowan took the central position, folding her arms behind her back. "Have they made any hostile moves?" "None, ma'am," said Lieutenant Ando, who looked as though he'd forgotten how to breathe. "Their propulsion appears low energy, fusion reaction mass with thermal dump to the radiators, no visible weapon signatures." "And the message?" He swallowed. "Confirmed translation. They call themselves Lorayans." Rowan let the name settle over her thoughts. She knew, in that moment, that everything the United Planets had prepared for, every broadcast into the dark, had been worth it. "Put me through to the assembly," she ordered. On Earth, the Global Assembly Chamber in Dakar erupted in debate. Delegates of every human colony and Earth district gathered under the sweeping glass dome, their arguments washing against each other in waves. Could be a feint, a ruse to assess our defenses. No evidence of aggression. We cannot squander this opportunity. We must prepare to respond in kind. President Imani Saleh sat at the heart of the chamber, hands steepled before her lips. Her eyes were fixed on the massive holoscreen above the dais, where the Lorayan ship rotated serenely in orbit. When she finally rose, the chamber fell into hush. "My fellow citizens," she said, her voice carrying the calm gravity that had made her the most respected leader in a generation. "For centuries we have looked into the void and wondered if we were alone. Today we have our answer." She paused, letting the words settle. It is tempting to greet them with suspicion, to see only the threat in what we do not understand. But the measure of our civilization is not how well we defend ourselves, but whether we dare to reach out a hand, even knowing the risk. Around her, some delegates shifted uneasily, but no one interrupted. Admiral Rowan, Sala said, glancing down at her comm tablet, "You have prepared contingency protocols for peaceful first contact, have you not?" "Yes, Madam President," Rowan's voice came over the chamber speakers, steady as iron. "Then you are authorized to proceed." Rowan inclined her head in the holoscreen. "Understood." "Let this moment be recorded," Sala said, her gaze sweeping the assembly, "as the hour humanity chose hope." Aboard the Aurora Ascendant, the comms crew finished compiling a carefully encoded return signal. Rowan watched as the transmission spooled through quantum relay, an elegant prelude to history. To the Lorraeans, "We are the United Planets. We welcome you. We are prepared to meet under conditions of mutual respect and peace." Seconds passed, then minutes. At last, the Lorraean ship pulsed with soft blue lights along its hull, an unmistakable gesture of acknowledgement. And on every human world, in every city and outpost, people paused to watch the stars, because for the first time in living memory, the galaxy had answered. The exchange of gifts. For 3 days, the Lorraean ship remained in high orbit, silent but for the occasional pulse of soft blue light along its hull. It was a display that human xenolinguists came to interpret as a signal of patience. They were waiting for humanity to decide how to proceed. Aboard the Aurora Ascendant, the conference rooms were transformed into impromptu strategy centers. Admirals, diplomats, and scientific envoys worked in rotating shifts, debating protocols that had existed only as theoretical exercises until now. Admiral Rowan presided over it all, her presence as unshakable as the ship itself. At last, the decision was made. A delegation would board the Lorraean ship to establish a formal dialogue, under carefully controlled security measures. In a hangar cavernous enough to swallow a stadium, the United Planets' first official envoy prepared to depart. The shuttle Pioneer was a sleek wedge of composite alloys, its hull gleaming under the vast lights. Painted along its flank was a line of text in every major human language: "We come in peace." President Imani Saleh watched the departure from a secure observation deck on Earth. The signal lag across the relay network made the shuttle's final countdown appear dreamlike, seconds delayed. As the Pioneer's engines flared and carried it away, she let out a long, unsteady breath. "How many times did we rehearse this?" she murmured. Her chief of staff, a thin man named Darius Tan, shifted beside her. 17, Madam President. 18 if you count the simulation with the Iskandar delegates. And every time it was theoretical, she said, until now. "They will do us proud," Darius said. She hoped he was right. The shuttle approached the Lorraean vessel in a slow arc. Closer now, the hull's overlapping plates seemed almost organic, like the scales of some vast, patient creature. At 5 kilometers, the Lorraeans sent a new transmission. "You are welcome. We will receive you." A seam appeared along the vessel's equator, opening with silent precision. Soft amber light spilled out, revealing an entry bay larger than the shuttle itself. The Pioneer passed through, dwarfed by the chamber. As soon as it touched down, the hatch ramp extended with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, the air shimmered faintly, breathable, though tinged with unknown trace gases. The human delegation filed out in pairs: Ambassador Eleni Corcoran, linguist Dr. Ravi Delion, cultural advisor Jamila Saeed, and a squad of security officers in unmarked navy blue armor. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, from a corridor lined with delicate, branching struts, the Lorraeans emerged. They were taller than the human delegation had expected, most nearly 3 meters in height. Their ashen skin was smooth, luminous in the golden light. Their eyes were enormous and dark, set in graceful faces that seemed neither young nor old. They wore garments of iridescent fabric that shifted in color as they moved, and each carried a slender staff that emitted a gentle chime when tapped against the floor. The lead figure stepped forward. Its voice came in the same musical cadence humanity had first heard over Mars. "We are the Lorraeans. I am Keresh, speaker for the Circle." Ambassador Corcoran inclined her head. "I am Eleni Corcoran, speaking for the United Planets of Sol. We come in peace and friendship." Keresh extended a hand, a long-fingered limb ending in a fan of pale digits. Corcoran placed her gloved hand against it. The gesture, agreed upon during days of careful translation, marked the first moment of contact. Across the United Planets, billions watched the broadcast in solemn wonder. In the days that followed, the Aurora Ascendant and the Lorraean flagship became a single orbiting embassy. Cargo shuttles moved back and forth, carrying samples of language archives, biological records, and technological artifacts. The first gifts were ceremonial: a carved obsidian plaque depicting the solar system, a Lorraean sculpture of abstract crystalline forms that hummed softly in response to touch. But soon practical exchanges began. In the Aurora's central auditorium, human scientists examined Lorraean spore cultures capable of metabolizing toxic compounds into oxygen. In return, Lorraean engineers studied humanity's compact fusion reactors with fascinated reverence. At one gathering, Dr. Delian approached Kyresh with a translator halo suspended around his throat. He gestured to a holographic rendering of a Lorraean city, tall spires rising from jungle canopies, waterfalls woven through gleaming terraces. "Your architecture, it's remarkable," Delian said. "Do you build your cities around existing ecosystems?" "We must." Kyresh replied, his dark eyes warm. "We learned long ago that to consume without replenishment is the road to extinction." Delian smiled faintly. "Humanity learned the same lesson, though, later than we should have. What matters is that you learned it." It was a small moment, but for Delian it captured the spirit of those first exchanges. Two species finding common ground, not in perfection, but in shared failures overcome. The final summit of the initial contact period took place in the Aurora Ascendant's Grand Hall, a chamber built for the day humanity would stand before the galaxy. Admiral Rowan stood to one side of the dais, her posture formal, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. She had spent her entire career imagining this moment in terms of strategy and caution. Yet when she looked at Kyresh, who seemed so earnest, so fragile, she felt something she hadn't expected: protectiveness. President Saleh appeared via holographic projection, her image life-sized and almost indistinguishable from reality. The chamber fell silent as she spoke. "On behalf of all the worlds of Sol, we extend our hands in friendship," she said. "May our peoples walk together in peace and discovery." Kyresh inclined his head, his luminous eyes reflecting the soft lights of the chamber. "We accept your hand, children of Sol. May our worlds be bound by trust." Applause rose, unbidden, as the translator repeated the words. Rowan found herself clapping, though she rarely indulged in public displays. In that moment, as she looked around the chamber, at the faces of her officers, the scholars, the dignitaries, she realized what she had not dared to believe. They were no longer alone, and perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy was not as silent as they'd feared. The Golden Ships. The Lorraeans had been among humanity for a little over 2 standard years when the first transmissions arrived. At first, they were dismissed as background anomalies, peculiar modulations in neutrino flux beyond the galactic rim, of no immediate consequence. The outermost observatories of the United Planets had detected similar signatures before: decaying black hole jets, cosmic rays, the dying breath of ancient stars. But these signals were different. They came in repeating intervals, not random noise. They formed a lattice of structured pulses so vast and regular that it could not have been natural. Rowan was in the tactical analysis chamber of the Aurora Ascendant when the preliminary report came in. She listened in silence as the sensor chief, Commander Salonen, replayed the raw signal. In the cavernous, darkened room, the pulses echoed through the audio feed, deep, resonant chords, almost like a chorus of cathedral bells tolling in the void. "Origin?" she asked. Salonen gestured to the tactical holomap. A volume of space beyond the rim, charted only in rough outlines, flashed in blue. 72,000 light-years past the galactic halo, he said. Trajectory inbound. Rowan felt a chill pass through her, though the chamber was perfectly climate-controlled. "And we're certain this is no natural phenomenon?" "No, Admiral," Salonen said. "We've run the signal through 5 independent pattern analysis matrices. Each returns a probability above 99.8% that this is an intentional transmission." Rowan inclined her head. "Very well. Begin compiling all sensor data. Send a copy to the Assembly Council and the Lorraean delegation." "Aye, ma'am." Within days, the transmissions had been picked up by Lorraean observatories as well. Ambassador Koresh came aboard the Aurora in person. Though the Lorraians had no prior record of the origin point, their physicists confirmed the signal's intelligence with almost reverent certainty. Whoever they are, Koresh told the Council in Dakar via secure relay, they have crossed the void between galaxies. It is an achievement beyond anything in our archives. Or perhaps a threat beyond anything in ours, Rowan interjected. The assembly erupted in debate. Even as public fascination with the signals reached fever pitch, a note of dread underlay every new broadcast. For the signals were drawing closer. 3 months later, the first ship appeared. It materialized without fanfare, no beacon, no hails, slipping into real space in the darkness between Lorrayan colonies. A lone mining platform on the rim of the Lorrayan system detected the gravitational ripple only moments before visual contact. The ship was vast. Larger than any human or Lorrayan construct, it resembled a golden blossom the size of a small moon. Its petals of iridescent alloy unfolded slowly, harvesting the pale light of the Lorrayan star. And then it began broadcasting. At first, the message was incomprehensible. A cascade of overlapping tonalities and ultraviolet flashes. But the ship's AI adapted with astonishing speed. Within an hour, it had learned enough of Lorrayan linguistic conventions to compose a simple phrase: "We are the Thalrashi. We come in peace. We bring gifts and the promise of kinship." Rowan reviewed the first images of the Thalrashi vessel in the Aurora's secure briefing room. Beside her, Koresh's expression was unreadable. "You know of them?" Rowan asked quietly. "No, Admiral." His eyes darkened as he studied the golden ship. "But any civilization that can cross intergalactic gulfs must be formidable." "That's one word for it," Rowan murmured. In the assembly, the debates turned from cautious optimism to open fear. President Saleh convened an emergency council of planetary governors, experts, and military advisors. "There can be no illusions," she told them in her measured voice. "These newcomers may be benign, but if they are not, no alliance or treaty can guarantee our safety." Some argued for immediate communication. Others called for a quarantine perimeter. A few urged humanity to extend every courtesy, fearful that any hint of suspicion might provoke a species powerful enough to traverse the void. In the end, it was the Lorraians who pressed for engagement. In a solemn address, Koresh stood before the assembly's dais, his tall form haloed by spotlights. "Children of Sol," he began, "my people have suffered isolation longer than yours. When you came to us, we hesitated, yet you proved yourselves by offering nothing but trust." He swept one long-fingered hand across the chamber. "Perhaps these Thalrashi come with the same intention. To greet them with suspicion may doom us to repeat the loneliness we all fled." The chamber fell into hushed reflection. And in the end, humanity did what it had always done best. They watched and waited. Over the next weeks, more Thalrashi vessels arrived, always alone, always in the same quiet, deliberate manner. They never ventured beyond the rim of Lorrayan space, never approached Sol. Each ship broadcast the same message of fellowship, always in increasingly sophisticated translations. "We have crossed many darknesses. We have gathered knowledge and compassion. We offer gifts that will lift your peoples beyond pain and hunger. Will you receive us?" Rowan read each transcript with growing unease. "It's too perfect," she told her senior staff in one closed session. "No civilization speaks only in the language of benevolence. No one crosses a void that vast merely out of charity." She looked around the table, meeting each officer's gaze. "Prepare readiness drills," she ordered. "Full-spectrum defense. We will not be caught unprepared." When word came that the Lorraians had decided to accept the Thalrashi invitation to establish a formal embassy, Rowan stood alone on the observation deck, watching Earth in its patient blue glow. Some part of her hoped she was wrong, that her instincts were relics of an older, more fearful era. But in the silence of her own thoughts, she knew. This was how it began. The Lorrayan on treaty. The first Lorrayan embassy to the Thalrashi flagship departed from their homeworld of Alith under the eyes of 1 billion watchers. The ship, a slender corvette wreathed in streaming white pennants, bore the sigils of every major Lorrayan settlement. It was meant to be a gesture of trust so overwhelming that no civilization could mistake it for anything else. From orbit above Alith, human observers aboard the Aurora Ascendant watched the departure in solemn silence. The Lorrayan government had refused to allow an armed escort. Admiral Rowan stood beside her tactical chief in the Aurora's briefing theater, a floor-to-ceiling window framing the departing ship as it dwindled toward the Thalrashi blossom. "Signal their command once more," Rowan said quietly. "Offer our support. Tell them we can maintain a remote overwatch. Unobtrusive, purely defensive." "Aye, ma'am." A moment passed, then another. The comms officer looked up, his expression tight. No response. Rowan exhaled, her jaw flexing. She had expected as much. In the assembly chamber on Earth, the debate reached a fever pitch. Ambassador Kiresh addressed the delegates via hologram, his image shimmering as it filled the dais. Even scaled to human proportion, the tall Lorraean seemed impossibly graceful, as though he were carved from living ivory. "We understand your caution," he began, his voice resonant. "We know that to you these visitors must appear as a force beyond comprehension. But ask yourselves, when you first looked upon us, did you not harbor the same fears?" President Saleh leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes intent. "Ambassador," she said, "you must understand that this is not the same. We could trace your development across centuries of observation. We saw the rise of your spacefaring culture. The Thalrashi, they emerged from nothing." "Perhaps that is precisely why we must meet them openly," Kiresh replied. "If we cower behind suspicion, we will teach them to do the same." A murmur rippled through the delegates. Rowan listened via secure feed from the Aurora. She felt her pulse hammering, though she kept her features still. "And if your trust is misplaced?" she asked. Her voice, filtered across the relay, carried the cold precision of a blade. "If their gifts are not gifts at all?" Kiresh turned to face her holographic representation. For a long moment, he simply studied her with those vast, liquid black eyes. "Then we will face the consequences," he said at last. "Better to risk that than to condemn ourselves to endless suspicion." The vote came within the hour. By a narrow margin, the Lorraean Assembly ratified formal relations with the Thalrashi. The first delegation was authorized to board the golden flagship in orbit. President Saleh stood in her private chamber, watching the tally appear on her console. Darius Tan lingered at her shoulder, silent. "They're walking into the dark," Saleh whispered, "and we can't stop them." Tan said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Later that same day, a formal entreaty arrived aboard the Aurora Ascendant. Kiresh himself came to deliver it. Rowan received him in her private office, a tall chamber whose walls were lined with models of every human vessel ever launched. Kiresh paused before the display of the Magellan, the first faster-than-light probe humanity had built. He regarded it as one might a cherished relic. "Your species is remarkable," he said softly. "You built these without ever knowing if anyone would answer your calls. You risked everything for discovery." Rowan's expression softened a fraction. "And you risk everything now, yes." Kiresh turned to her fully, and for the first time since their alliance had begun, she saw uncertainty in his gaze. "That is why I have come, Admiral, to ask you to stand with us." Rowan's hands closed behind her back. "You want us to join you in accepting their offers. Not blindly, not without caution, but openly. If we meet them together, perhaps we can understand them more fully and protect each other if things go poorly." Rowan studied him in silence. "I respect you," she said finally, "and I trust your people as much as I trust any ally, but I cannot and will not commit humanity to an alliance with an unknown power whose intentions we cannot verify." Kiresh inclined his head. "Then perhaps you might at least not stand apart. Monitor the negotiations. Be present." Rowan considered that. It was a compromise, one she suspected the Assembly would approve. "I will recommend that to the President," she said. "Thank you." They stood together for a moment, gazing at the tiny model of the Magellan. "Did you know," Rowan murmured, "that when we built her, half the Assembly argued it was a waste of resources, that we should focus inward, solve our own problems first? What changed their minds? We reminded them that one day we might be judged by whether we dared to look outward at all." Kiresh's long fingers touched the edge of the display case, as if feeling for some hidden warmth. "Then let us look outward together." The meeting ended in quiet accord, though neither of them would call it peace. When the Lorraean delegation departed the Aurora, Rowan stood at her office window, watching their shuttle drift back toward the golden ship. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, the Thalrashi watched them all, and she could not shake the conviction that this was not a meeting of equals. Gifts of Doom. The first Thalrashi gifts arrived without fanfare. On the morning of the third Lorraean Thalrashi summit, a cluster of smaller craft detached from the golden flagship and descended toward Olith's upper atmosphere. Each resembled a gleaming teardrop, its hull a mosaic of gold and pale opalescence. The Lorraeans called them Deliverance, a term that would later come to symbolize something darker. From the Aurora Ascendant, Admiral Rowan watched in grim silence as the Deliverance released their payloads. At first, nothing seemed amiss. The pods split open like flower petals, and their contents, swarms of luminous motes, spread across Olith's stratosphere. Local broadcasts reported no harmful readings, no radiation spikes. Within hours, the Lorraean planetary authorities announced that the motes were nanite clusters, self-replicating machines designed to terraform and rejuvenate failing biospheres. The Thalrashi have offered to cleanse our polluted air, heal our poisoned rivers, declared High Speaker Renalith during a holocast viewed across the United Planets. They expect nothing in return but our trust. Even Rowan had to admit the evidence seemed persuasive. Sensor telemetry confirmed that oxygen levels in Olith's industrial regions rose by 12% within a day. Rivers once choked with effluents ran clear. Ancient fungal plagues receded from crop fields that had been barren for generations. From orbit, Olith looked renewed, its cloud bands pearly white, its oceans shifting from sickly green to brilliant cobalt. And yet, for all the celebration in Lorraean cities, the sight made Rowan's skin crawl. 2 weeks later, the Thalrashi delivered their second gift, the lattice engines. The engines came in sealed containment canisters, each the size of a small freighter. When Lorraean engineers dismantled the shielding, they found compact fusion cores capable of a power density an order of magnitude beyond any known design. In the assembly chamber on Earth, the revelation sparked a frenzy. "This is the leap we have dreamed of," said Minister Haruto Chen of Mars. "If these cores are genuine, they could end resource scarcity permanently." Others were more cautious. "These technologies are hundreds, perhaps thousands of years beyond anything we possess," Rowan argued, standing before the holographic dais. "We have no way to verify their limitations or hidden functions. A single fail-safe command could cripple entire worlds." President Sala rubbed her forehead, weariness creasing her face. "Admiral, do you believe the Lorraeans are being deceived?" "Yes," Rowan said without hesitation. Koresh, appearing beside her as a shimmering projection, bowed his head. "We hear your concerns, Admiral, but already the lattice engines have restored power to 3 of our failing habitats. Our people no longer freeze in the darkness, no longer ration water and light. If this is deception, it is the most generous deception in history." "It always begins that way," Rowan said quietly. "And it always ends in dependence." In private, Sala confided her own doubts. Late one evening, she called Rowan via secure channel. The president's face appeared in the admiral's darkened ready room, illuminated only by the glow of Earth's blue disk beyond the viewport. "I'm running out of ways to say no," Sala admitted. "Public opinion is turning. Every newsfeed hails the Thalrashi as saviors." "That's by design," Rowan replied. "If you want to conquer a people, you don't start with armies. You start by making them feel they can't survive without you." Sala closed her eyes. "If we refuse their gifts, we risk appearing backward, uncooperative. If we accept them, we may lose the freedom to choose anything at all." Neither woman spoke for a long time. At last, Sala opened her eyes again. "You believe this is a prelude to invasion?" Rowan's voice was low, unshakable. "Yes." Despite Rowan's warnings, the tide of Lorraean acceptance became a flood. More deliverance arrived, seeding their nanites across every Lorraean colony. Lattice engines were installed in planetary grids, their output hailed as miraculous. A generation of Lorraeans grew up never knowing the privation their ancestors had endured. When Thalrashi envoys arrived in person, tall, golden-robed beings with smooth, featureless faces, Lorraean crowds welcomed them as liberators. At the edge of every celebration, human observers stood apart, watching, recording, waiting for the moment when the gifts would reveal their price. It came first in a whisper. A rumor passed between Lorraean merchants docked at Carthea Station. Entire townships, they said, had been evacuated. Strategic defense outposts decommissioned. Some planetary governors had vanished without explanation. At first, these stories were dismissed as paranoia, but soon, more credible reports reached Rowan's command. Orbital defense platforms powered by lattice engines had gone offline, citing maintenance subroutines no Lorraine engineer could override. When the platforms came back online, their control codes had changed, now accessible only via Thalrashi command protocols. On the Aurora Ascendant, Rowan convened her senior officers in the command amphitheater. The room was hushed, lit only by the cold white of the main holodisplay. The projection showed a cluster of Lorraine defense satellites, once part of the Olith planetary shield, now emitting an unfamiliar encryption signature. "This is how it begins," Rowan said. Her voice carried no triumph, only sorrow. "Not with an attack, but with the quiet theft of autonomy." Commander Salonen frowned. "Have the Lorraines confirmed this?" Rowan nodded once. "Off the record, their security ministry is in chaos." "And Kiresh?" Rowan closed her eyes. "He still believes this can be resolved diplomatically." She turned, meeting each officer's gaze in turn. "But I am telling you now, it will not end in diplomacy." The next day, as if to confirm her fears, the Thalrashi sent a new broadcast. "Friends of Olith, our gifts require stewardship. To ensure their safe operation, we will assume limited custodial oversight of your defense infrastructure. This is temporary and will ensure mutual security." And just like that, the Lorraine sovereignty Rowan had admired, so hard-won, so proud, was quietly eclipsed. Rowan stared at the final line of the message, displayed in glowing script across her tactical screens. "Do not fear, we come only as friends," her hands curled into fists behind her back. "No, you came as conquerors, and I will not let you do the same to us." The silence falls. It began with a single lost signal. The outpost world of Thalora had been among the most remote of the Lorraine colonies, a world of wind-scoured canyons and vast mineral deposits. Its settlements were small but vital, supplying raw materials for the Lorraine reconstruction effort. One evening, the settlement's planetary comm relay flickered, then went dark. At first, the Lorraine Ministry of Planetary Affairs assumed a weather anomaly. Dust storms could occasionally overwhelm atmospheric transceivers. A repair vessel was dispatched. It never arrived. 2 days later, an automated cargo drone tried to dock at Thalora's main orbital station. Its telemetry was relayed in real time to a Lorraine command center and to the United Planets observer stationed there. Rowan watched in silence as the drone's cameras swept over empty docking arms. No lights, no movement. The station, normally bustling with thousands of workers, hung in orbit like a dead husk. No distress calls, no emergency beacons, just silence. On the second day, 2 more colonies fell quiet, then 5, then 12. One by one, the frontier settlements that had accepted Thalrashi custodial oversight vanished from the network. Some of the last messages were little more than fragmented audio, shouting, alarms, the rising note of something too deep and resonant to be mechanical. Then nothing. On Earth, the assembly chamber erupted into panic. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding immediate condemnation, others insisting on further investigation. President Sala sat motionless in her chair, her expression fixed and unreadable. Ambassador Kiresh appeared via secure relay. He looked gaunt, his eyes sunken, as though he had not slept in days. "This cannot be what it seems," he said. "The Thalrashi assured us these measures were only to ensure peace." Rowan's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "They are not here for peace." She stood in the central projection well, the live feed of her ship's sensor data spiraling behind her. "They have dismantled your defenses. They have isolated your colonies, and now they are removing your people." "You do not know that," Karesh protested. "You have no proof." Rowan turned, locking eyes with him across the light years. "Then where are they?" Karesh flinched. No one spoke. Over the next week, a torrent of partial data flowed in. Broken signals and panicked eyewitness accounts from vessels that escaped the Thalrashi's tightening cordon. A transport captain named Haleth Veron limped into Lorraine space aboard a freighter pitted with blast scars. His ship carried only a fraction of its intended passengers, families who had fled in the dark, leaving behind everything they had ever known. In the crowded medical bay of the Aurora Ascendant, Rowan stood at the foot of his bed as he recounted what he'd seen. "They came at dawn," Veron whispered, his voice raw. The sky was full of golden lights. Not weapons at first, just these swarms, They drifted down over the city and people started collapsing. He shuddered. I saw them, carried away in fields of that same golden light. Hundreds, thousands, lifted up like they weighed nothing. They didn't even struggle. It was as if they weren't aware anymore. His gaze met hers, hollow. There was no warning, no demands, they simply took us. Rowan felt her heart clench. She had prepared her whole life for the possibility of war, but nothing in her training had ever spoken to this. An invasion without declaration, an annihilation wreathed in the language of benevolence. In the assembly, the last illusions began to die. President Saleh convened a crisis council. Her voice, broadcast across every United Planets channel, was steady but tinged with grief. Citizens of Sol and our allies beyond, we are faced with an undeniable truth. The Thalrashi are not our benefactors. They are not our partners. They are something else. Something that has already stolen entire worlds in the name of stewardship. She drew a slow breath. We will no longer watch in silence. Rowan had hoped this declaration would be enough to rally the Lorrayans to action. But when she called Kyresh in the aftermath, she found him sitting alone in a dim chamber aboard the Lorrayan flagship. His robes were rumpled, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. You were right, he whispered before she could speak. Rowan felt no triumph, only sorrow. What will you do? She asked. Kyresh raised his hollow gaze. What can we do? Our fleets are crippled. Our defenses are in their hands. My people, they trusted too much. You are not alone, Rowan said. For a long moment, the Lorrayan ambassador simply stared at her. Then, with visible effort, he straightened. I will bring the refugees to you, the ones who remain, and I will ask, without pride, without expectation, that you shelter them. Rowan nodded once. You have my word. The next day, ragged convoys of Lorrayan ships began their flight toward human space. From the observation decks of the Aurora Ascendant, Rowan watched them emerge from hyperspace, scarred, flickering with system failures, crowded with survivors who had seen their worlds extinguished. They came not as dignitaries or partners, but as exiles, and humanity received them without hesitation.